The moment everything changed wasn't loud, dramatic, or filled with chaos. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that says more than words ever could. For the Golden Bachelor fans, the journey of Cindy Cullers and Mel Owens had all the ingredients of a love story that should have worked. The laughter, the chemistry, the long looks that lingered just a little too long. It all felt real, maybe too real. And that's exactly why what happened next left so many people wondering, what did Cindy really know? Because when Cindy chose to walk away, it didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like a decision, a powerful one. At first, everything between Cindy and Mel seemed effortless. There was a warmth in the way he looked at her, like she made the world slow down for a second. And Cindy? She wasn't just there for a fairy tale. She knew what she wanted. Something deep, something lasting, something honest. And honestly, she wasn't afraid to ask for it. There's always that moment in relationships where things shift. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a tiny crack in the rhythm, a pause that feels slightly too long, a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Cindy felt that. She noticed how Mel sometimes held back when conversations got serious, how he smiled through questions instead of answering them, how the future, their future, felt like a topic he gently danced around. And Cindy isn't the kind of woman who chases answers that don't want to be given. So when she started to sense that something wasn't aligning, she didn't ignore it. She leaned into it. Meanwhile, there was also Peg Munson, someone who shared a different kind of connection with Mel, softer, quieter, but just as meaningful in its own way. To viewers, it may have looked like a love triangle. To Cindy, it felt like a question. Not, will he choose me, but is this the kind of love I deserve? And that question changes everything. There's something almost poetic about the way Cindy handled it. No grand speech, no tears meant to convince anyone, just clarity. She chose herself. And that's where the curiosity begins. Because people started asking, did she already know? Did she see something in Mel that told her his heart was somewhere else? Did she feel that Peg had already become his choice? It's an easy assumption to make. After all, timing is everything. Walking away that close to the end, it feels intentional. But Cindy made one thing very clear. She didn't leave because she knew the outcome. She left because she knew herself. She explained that if Mel had truly already made up his mind, his actions wouldn't have felt the way they did. The way he laughed with her, the way he held her, the way he created moments that felt genuine. And that's what makes it complicated. Because you don't twirl someone under the sunset, look into their eyes, and create memories like that if your heart is already somewhere else. Or do you? That's the question that lingers. Cindy believes that when someone has made their final decision, their behavior changes. There's a distance, a hesitation, a quiet pulling away. But Cindy didn't feel that. Instead, she felt connection, which made her decision even harder and even more powerful. Because walking away when things are clearly broken is one thing. Walking away when things still feel good, that takes courage. And maybe, just maybe, that's why so many people respect her for it. There's also something almost funny, yet painfully real, about how relationships can look perfect on the outside while feeling uncertain on the inside. Cindy and Mel had chemistry. No one can deny that. They laughed, they connected, they shared moments that could easily convince anyone watching that this was it. But Cindy wasn't there to play a role in a love story. She wanted the whole story. And when she realized that the future she was imagining wasn't being matched with the same clarity, she stepped back. Not angrily, not bitterly, just honestly. And that honesty is rare. After leaving, Cindy reflected on everything with surprising peace. There was no sense of regret in her words, no what if lingering in the background. Instead, there was acceptance. She acknowledged that while Mel is a good man, he simply wasn't in the same place as her. And sometimes that's all it comes down to. Timing, readiness, willingness. Because love isn't just about connection, it's about alignment. Meanwhile, Mel's journey continued, leading him to give his final rose to Peg. But even that moment came with its own twist. Instead of a proposal, he offered something less traditional, a promise ring, a symbol of commitment, but not quite the full leap. And interestingly, Peg was okay with that. She embraced the idea of building their story at their own pace, writing their own version of love without pressure. And in a strange way, that contrast says everything. Peg was comfortable with where Mel was. Cindy wasn't. And neither of them were wrong. They were just different. That's what makes this story so relatable. It's not about villains or heroes. It's about choices, about knowing what you need and having the strength to walk away when it's not being met. Cindy didn't leave because she lost. She left because she refused to settle for uncertainty. And honestly, there's something incredibly romantic about that. Not the fairy tale kind of romance, the real kind. The kind where you choose yourself even when your heart is still involved. The kind where you walk away with dignity instead of waiting for clarity that may never come. And maybe that's why her story resonates so deeply. Because at some point, everyone has faced a moment like that. A moment where something feels almost right, but not quite enough. And the hardest decision isn't choosing someone else. It's choosing yourself. In the end, Cindy didn't need to know whether Mel had chosen Peg, because her decision wasn't about them. It was about her. And that's what makes it powerful. So the real question isn't whether she knew. It's whether more people would have the courage to do what she did. To walk away, not because they're certain of the outcome, but because they're certain of their worth. And maybe that's the kind of ending that isn't sad at all. Maybe it's just the beginning.
Maybe that
of a
better story didn't begin with fireworks or a dramatic declaration. Maybe it started quietly, in the comfort of Cindy's own space, far away from the cameras, the pressure, and the constant question of what happens next. Back home, everything felt different. No more roses, no more carefully planned dates, no more wondering if today would be the day everything changes. Just real life. And in that real life, Cindy Cullers finally had something she hadn't fully experienced during the journey: clarity without interruption. At first, there's always a strange silence after something intense ends, the kind of silence that feels unfamiliar, almost too still. It's in those moments that memories start replaying, the good ones especially. The laughter, the connection, the way Mel Owens looked at her during those quiet conversations, and yes, even the what-ifs. But here's the interesting part. Those what-ifs didn't stay long, because every time her mind drifted in that direction, something stronger pulled it back. A simple realization. If it was truly right, she wouldn't have had to question it. And that thought, it changed everything. There's something unexpectedly funny about how we sometimes romanticize uncertainty. We tell ourselves that confusion means depth, that mixed signals mean mystery. But Cindy began to see it differently. To her, love shouldn't feel like solving a puzzle. It should feel like coming home. And suddenly, all those moments that once felt magical started to look a little different under that lens. Not worse, just clearer. She could still smile about them, still appreciate them, but she no longer mistook them for something they weren't. Meanwhile, life continued for Mel. His connection with Peg Munson stepped into a new chapter, one that wasn't built on grand gestures, but on something slower, more deliberate. A promise instead of a proposal, a beginning instead of a finale. And while some people questioned that choice, others found it refreshing. Not every love story needs to follow the same script. Peg seemed content, even confident in the path they were taking. And that's where the contrast becomes almost poetic again, because while Peg was embracing a love that was still unfolding, Cindy had already decided she needed a love that felt certain, not someday, not maybe, but clearly, confidently now. And honestly, there's something both beautiful and a little humorous about how differently people define ready. For some, ready means taking small steps. For others, it means being all in. Neither is wrong, but mixing the two, that's where things get complicated. Cindy understood that now more than ever. She wasn't looking for hesitation wrapped in charm. She wasn't looking for almost. She wanted something that didn't require interpretation, something where the answer wasn't hidden between the lines. And the more she sat with that truth, the lighter everything felt. There was no bitterness in her reflection, no sense of, I wish I had stayed longer, or maybe I should have waited. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that grew stronger with time, the kind that says, I made the right choice without needing anyone else to confirm it. Of course, that doesn't mean she didn't laugh about some of it, because looking back, there are always those little moments that make you smile for unexpected reasons, like how seriously everyone takes those romantic twirls, as if a perfect spin under the sunset can answer life's biggest questions, or how a single look can be overanalyzed 100 different ways. Did that mean something? Was that a sign? Was that the moment everything changed? And sometimes the answer is simply no. Sometimes it was just a moment. A nice one, yes, but still just a moment. And that realization, it's oddly freeing, because it means you don't have to build a future out of every beautiful memory. You can just let it be what it was. As time moved on, Cindy's story started to feel less like an ending and more like a reset, a chance to approach love again, but this time with even clearer standards, and maybe a little more humor too. Because if there's one thing experiences like this teach you, it's that love doesn't always arrive in the way you expect. Sometimes it shows up as a lesson, sometimes it shows up as clarity, and sometimes it just shows up just long enough to help you understand what you truly want. For Cindy, that understanding became her strongest takeaway. She didn't need to wonder anymore if she was asking for too much. She wasn't. She was just asking the wrong person, and that's a big difference. Meanwhile, for those still watching from the outside, the questions haven't completely disappeared. People still debate. Did Mel handle things the right way? Was the promise ring enough? Could things have been different if Cindy stayed? But maybe those questions don't really matter anymore, because the most important part of the story was never about who ended up with whom. It was about how each person chose to move forward. Mel followed his heart in his own way. Peg embraced a love that fit her pace. And Cindy, she walked away with something just as meaningful: self-respect, clarity, and the confidence to wait for something better. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of ending that doesn't need a final rose to feel complete. Because sometimes the strongest love story isn't the one that plays out in front of everyone. It's the one that quietly begins after everything else fades away. The one where you finally stop asking, do they choose me? And start saying, I choose me. And from there,
Once you reach that point,
is possible.
something unexpected happens. Life doesn't suddenly become perfect. There's no magical moment where everything falls into place overnight. But there is a shift, subtle, powerful, and impossible to ignore. For Cindy Cullers, that shift showed up in the smallest, most ordinary ways. Morning coffee tasted a little better. Conversations with friends felt lighter. Even the quiet evenings, the ones that used to feel a bit lonely, started to feel peaceful. Because for the first time in a while, there was no emotional guessing game. No wondering what someone meant. No analyzing every word, every pause, every look. Just simplicity. And surprisingly, simplicity can feel incredibly romantic when you've been through confusion. There's also something almost ironic about how stepping away from a love story can bring you closer to the kind of love you actually want. Not immediately, of course, but internally. Cindy started noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way she communicated, the things she tolerated, the moments she almost ignored her instincts because everything else looked right. And that awareness, it became her superpower. Because now, if something didn't feel aligned, she didn't hesitate. She didn't overthink. She didn't try to make it work. She simply smiled and moved on. And honestly, there's something both empowering and a little funny about that. Because let's be real, how many times do people stay just a little too long hoping things will magically turn into what they imagined? Cindy wasn't doing that anymore. Meanwhile, the world kept watching the Golden Bachelor story unfold, especially the evolving relationship between Mel Owens and Peg Munson. Their journey continued at its own pace, quiet, steady, and intentionally different from what many expected.
No rush, no pressure. Just two people figuring things out in their own time. And while some admired that approach, others couldn't help but compare it to what might have been. Because that's what people do. They imagine alternate endings. What if Cindy had stayed? What if Mel had been more certain sooner? What if everything lined up just a little differently? But here's the truth that slowly becomes impossible to ignore. The what-if version of a story is rarely better than the real one, because the real one is built on truth, and truth, even when it's not perfect, is always stronger than fantasy. Cindy understood that now. She didn't need an alternate ending. She needed a real beginning, and that's exactly what she was creating. There's a quiet confidence in knowing you didn't settle, in knowing you walked away not out of fear, but out of clarity. And that confidence has a way of changing how you show up in the world. People notice it, not in an obvious, flashy way, but in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you no longer try to shrink your expectations just to fit someone else's comfort zone. Cindy wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. She had already made her choice, and that choice was herself. Of course, that doesn't mean love is off the table. If anything, it becomes even more exciting, because now it's not about finding any connection. It's about recognizing the right one, the kind where there's no hesitation, no mixed signals, no need to question where you stand, and maybe even a little less overanalyzing of sunset twirls. Because let's be honest, as beautiful as those moments are, real love isn't built on perfect scenes. It's built on consistency, on honesty, on two people being on the same page without needing to decode each other. And that's the kind of love Cindy is now open to. Not rushed, not forced, just real. Meanwhile, somewhere in the background of all this, there's a gentle reminder for anyone who's ever watched a love story unfold, whether on screen or in real life. It's easy to focus on who ends up together, but sometimes the most meaningful part of the story is who walks away and why. Because walking away takes strength, it takes clarity, and sometimes it even takes a little bit of humor, especially when you look back and realize how close you were to settling for something that wasn't quite right. Cindy can laugh about it now, not because it didn't matter, but because she knows she made the right call. And that kind of peace, it's hard to fake. So while the world continues to talk, debate, and replay every moment of that journey, her focus is somewhere else entirely. Forward. Not on what could have been, not on what almost worked, but on what will. Because the story didn't end when she walked away. That was just the moment she stopped being part of someone else's uncertain ending and started writing her own certain beginning. And maybe, somewhere not too far ahead, there's a moment waiting for her. Not filled with questions, not wrapped in hesitation, but simple, clear, and undeniable. The kind of moment where she won't have to ask anything at all, because she'll already know. And this time, that knowing will be mutual.